At exactly 6:42 a.m., the airport decided who mattered. It wasn't written anywhere.
No sign.
No announcement. But everyone felt it. At Chicago O'Hare International, Gate C-17 buzzed with the low, irritated hum of people who believed their time was more valuable than others. Business travelers in press suits. Influencers pretending not to film. Parents bargaining with exhausted children. Everyone had somewhere to be, and everyone believed they deserved to be there more than the person standing next to them. Nathan Cole stood quietly near the window. He was dressed simply. Dark jacket, clean sneakers, neutral colors. No designer logos. No visible watch. His carry-on bag was small and worn, the kind you buy once and keep forever. He looked ordinary. That was the problem. Because Seat 2A was not meant for ordinary men. Boarding Group 1. Now boarding Group 1. The announcement rippled through the gate like a status alarm. People stood abruptly, some checking passes they already knew qualified, others hoping proximity might elevate them. Nathan didn't rush. He waited. When he stepped forward, a woman in front of him turned sharply.
Group 1 only, she snapped.
Nathan raised his boarding pass slightly. So am I. She looked at him, really looked, then frowned. That can't be right. He smiled politely. It is. She scoffed and moved aside reluctantly, muttering something under her breath. Nathan boarded. Inside the jet bridge, the tone shifted. Softer lighting. Thicker carpet. The smell of manufactured calm. First class greeted him with leather seats and hushed voices. Seat 2A. Window. Exactly where the boarding pass said. Nathan placed his bag overhead and sat. Across the aisle, someone noticed. Then someone else. Then whispers. He didn't hear them, but he felt them. The way people assess value, without asking questions. Enter Margaret Whitmore. Margaret Whitmore boarded last. She always did. She believed entrances mattered. Her heels clicked with authority. Her posture was perfect. Her coat was tailored precisely to suggest both wealth and discipline. She scanned the cabin as if evaluating an investment. Then she froze. Her eyes locked onto Seat 2A. Onto Nathan. Her lips pressed thin. She checked her boarding pass. Seat 2B. Directly beside him. No, she said softly. The flight attendant, Lisa, smiled professionally. Welcome aboard, Ms. Whitmore. Margaret gestured toward Nathan as if pointing out a stain. There's a mistake. Lisa followed her gaze. I don't see one, ma'am. Margaret lowered her voice, but not enough. That man is in the wrong cabin. Nathan looked up. I'm in 2A, he said calmly. Margaret laughed. It wasn't kind. Please, she said. I fly this route weekly. First class is for executives. Investors. People with responsibility. Nathan met her eyes. And you don't look like one. Lisa stiffened. Ma'am, he's correctly seated. Margaret leaned closer. I'm the chairwoman of Whitmore Holdings. I don't sit next to mistakes. The word hung heavy. Nathan said nothing. Lisa hesitated. I'll check with the purser. Margaret smiled, satisfied. Nathan looked out the window as the aircraft prepared for departure. Outside, rain streaked the glass. He had seen worse. The first crack. As the plane taxied, Margaret continued talking, to Lisa, to herself, to anyone listening. I don't understand how standard have dropped this far, she said. I pay for peace. Nathan closed his eyes. Not in anger. In patience. When the seatbelt sign turned off, Margaret unbuckled aggressively. This won't stand, she said. I'll escalate. She stood abruptly, bumping Nathan's arm. Watch it, she snapped. Nathan looked at his sleeve. Then back at her. It's fine. That calm unsettled her. Don't patronize me. She flagged Lisa again. I want to moved. Or I move. Lisa swallowed. Ma'am, all seats are full. Margaret smiled thinly. Then downgrade him. Silence spread. Passengers pretended not to hear. Nathan finally spoke. Why does it matter so much? Margaret leaned in. Because people like you don't belong where decisions are made. Nathan studied her. That's interesting, he said softly. Because decisions are exactly why I'm here. She laughed. The plane lifted off. None of them knew yet. This flight wasn't going to end the way she expected. Somewhere over the Midwest. Nathan opened his laptop. No stickers. No brand. Just a black screen that woke instantly. Margaret glanced sideways. Oh, now you're working? Nathan didn't respond. He logged in. A secure interface appeared. At the top. Horizon Strategic Acquisitions. Margaret scoffed. Fake companies always have dramatic names. Nathan typed calmly. On the screen. Pending review. Whitmore Holdings. Margaret leaned closer. What's that? Nathan closed the laptop. And smiled. Probably nothing, he said.
For now.
At cruising altitude, people stop pretending. The masks they wear on the ground, politeness, restraint, professionalism, thin out once the earth drops away beneath them. At 35,000 feet, entitlement feels safer. Louder. Untouchable. Margaret Whitmore believed that altitude amplified authority. She reclined her seat slightly, just enough to invade Nathan Cole's space without technically breaking a rule. Her perfume drifted across the narrow gap, expensive and intentional. Nathan didn't move. He adjusted his screen brightness and continued typing, fingers steady, posture relaxed. He typed the way surgeons operate, efficient, precise, without unnecessary motion. Margaret watched him from the corner of her eye. Still calm. Still unbothered. That irritated her more than resistance ever could. The language of power. You know, Margaret said casually, lifting her champagne glass, there's a certain etiquette in first class. Nathan didn't look up. Is there? Absolutely, she replied. We respect privacy. We don't ask questions. And we don't pretend to be something we're not. Nathan paused his typing, closed the laptop slowly, turned to face her. And what do you think I'm pretending to be? Margaret smiled, a tight, practiced expression. Someone important. The word landed exactly as she intended. Nathan studied her face. Not judging. Cataloging. I see, he said. Margaret took a sip of champagne. Don't misunderstand me, she continued. I'm not unkind. I simply believe every space has standards. And who sets them? Nathan asked. Margaret laughed softly. People who earn them. Nathan nodded. That makes sense. The ease of his agreement unsettled her. She expected protest, defense, anger. Instead, he turned back to his laptop.
Dismissed.
Margaret's jaw tightened. The first witness. 2 rows back, a man pretended to read a magazine while listening carefully. He was mid-40s, salt and pepper hair, quiet demeanor. He had watched Margaret Whitmore dismantle people before, in boardrooms, in restaurants, in charity galas. She didn't shout. She suggested. She didn't insult. She implied. And people folded. Except this one hadn't. That bothered her. A calculated escalation. Margaret pressed the call button. Lisa arrived moments later. Yes, Ms. Whitmore? Margaret gestured subtly toward Nathan. I'm being made uncomfortable. Lisa glanced at Nathan. He sat calmly, hands folded. How so, ma'am? Margaret leaned in conspiratorially. He's staring. Listening. It's unsettling. Nathan raised an eyebrow. I'm working, he said evenly. Lisa hesitated. Ma'am, he hasn't violated any. I don't feel safe, Margaret interrupted. The phrase hung heavy. Nathan looked at Lisa, then back at Margaret. That's a serious accusation. Margaret met his gaze without flinching. So is sitting where you don't belong. Lisa swallowed. I'll notify the purser. Margaret leaned back, satisfied. This was familiar territory. Paper trails. Authority. Pressure. Nathan watched Lisa walk away, then reopened his laptop. What Margaret didn't know. Nathan wasn't typing emails. He wasn't reviewing documents. He was observing patterns. Every reaction. Every word. Every escalation. People like Margaret Whitmore believed power was static. Inherited. Preserved. Nathan knew better. Power was dynamic. Responsive. And often self-destructive. Memory. 10 years earlier. Nathan had been younger then, less careful, still learning the cost of proximity. He remembered sitting in a conference room while Margaret Whitmore spoke about strategic redundancies. She never said layoffs, never said families, just numbers. He remembered raising a concern, being ignored. He remembered the aftermath. He had learned something that day. People like Margaret never believed consequences applied to them. Back in the cabin, the purser arrived. A tall man with calm eyes and a measured voice. "Ms. Whitmore," he said politely. "You requested assistance?" "Yes," Margaret replied. "I'd like this passenger relocated." The purser glanced at Nathan's seat number. "All first-class seats are occupied." Margaret sighed theatrically. "Then perhaps he can be accommodated elsewhere." Nathan closed his laptop again. "I'm in my assigned seat," he said. "If there's an issue, I'd prefer it be documented." The purser nodded slowly. "Of course." Margaret stiffened. "Documented." That wasn't part of her plan. "I don't want documentation," she snapped. "I want resolution." Nathan smiled faintly. "Those aren't always the same thing." Margaret turned to the purser. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," the purser replied evenly. "And I also know who he is." Margaret blinked. "What?" The purser didn't elaborate. He simply said, "There will be no seat changes," and walked away. Margaret's face flushed. The breaking point. She leaned toward Nathan, voice low and sharp. "You think you've won?" Nathan met her eyes. "No," he said softly. "I think you're revealing yourself." Margaret scoffed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Nathan nodded. "You're right," he said. "I have a very clear idea." She stood abruptly, brushing past him harder than necessary. As she reached for her glass on the console, turbulence hit. The champagne sloshed, spilled, across Nathan's jacket. The cabin gasped. Margaret froze. For half a second. Then, she smiled. "Oh, dear," she said. "Clumsy of me." Nathan looked down at the spreading stain, then back up at her. "It's fine," he said quietly. That calm again. That unbearable calm. Margaret's smile faltered. "Documentation." Lisa hurried over. "Oh my, sir, I'm so sorry." "It's all right," Nathan replied. "Please log the incident." Margaret laughed nervously. "An accident," she said. "Surely we don't need paperwork." Nathan's gaze didn't leave hers. "I think we do." Lisa nodded. "I'll file a report." Margaret's chest tightened. This wasn't going how it usually did. The long flight ahead. As the plane continued eastward, Margaret sat rigid, replaying the interaction again and again. Something about Nathan unsettled her. Not because he was loud, not because he was threatening, but because he wasn't afraid. Nathan, meanwhile, watched clouds drift by. The stain on his jacket would wash out. Margaret Whitmore's assumptions would not. Meanwhile, on the ground, thousands of miles away, an assistant checked her inbox. One flagged message stood out. Subject: Whitmore Holdings, Priority Review. Sender: Nathan Cole. She opened it and felt her stomach drop. Somewhere over the Atlantic. Margaret finally spoke again. "You're enjoying this," she accused. Nathan shook his head. "No," he said. "I'm observing consequences begin." She stared at him. "You don't scare me." Nathan smiled gently. "I'm not here to." Then he added, "But by the time we land, you'll understand why you should have been." By the 5th hour of the flight, Margaret Whitmore had stopped pretending to be calm. She sat rigid in seat 2B, spine perfectly straight, hands folded tightly in her lap. Anyone watching from a distance might have mistaken her posture for composure. But inside, something had shifted. Control was slipping. Not dramatically, not publicly, but enough for her to feel it. And Margaret Whitmore hated nothing more than uncertainty. Across from her, Nathan Cole had returned to his work. The jacket stained with champagne lay folded beside him, treated with the same indifference he gave everything else that didn't matter. That was the problem. He wasn't reacting. Not with anger. Not with fear. Not even with irritation. He was observing. Margaret had built her entire life on provoking reactions. Employees rushed when she raised her voice. Executives stumbled when she questioned their competence. Airlines bent rules when she mentioned her name. Nathan Cole did none of that, and that made him dangerous. The cabin adjusts. The first-class cabin slowly returned to its routine. Lunch trays were cleared. Lights dimmed. Conversations softened into murmurs. Most passengers chose distraction over discomfort, but a few were watching. They noticed how the flight attendants kept a careful distance from Margaret now, how they spoke to Nathan with quiet respect, how documentation had changed the tone of the air around them.
Paper trails did that.
They made behavior real. Margaret noticed too. She pressed the call button again. Lisa arrived, professional but cautious. Yes, ma'am. Margaret lowered her voice. I want to speak to the captain. Lisa hesitated. For what reason? Margaret's eyes flicked toward Nathan. I feel unsafe. There it was again. The nuclear option. Lisa inhaled slowly. I'll inform the purser, she said. Nathan looked up. You're escalating, he said calmly. Margaret's jaw tightened. And you're enjoying it. Nathan shook his head.
No.
I'm documenting it. That word again. Documenting. Margaret's fingers curled into her palm. Memory. How she learned power. Margaret had been 26 the first time she realized fear was more efficient than respect. She had been ignored in a boardroom full of men twice her age. Talked over.
Dismissed.
Smiled at politely while her ideas were set aside. So she changed tactics. She sharpened her tone.
Cut people off.
Called mistakes out publicly.
And it worked.
People listened. They mistook her aggression for leadership. She mistook their compliance for loyalty. And for decades, no one corrected her. Until now. Nathan Cole's reputation unspoken. Nathan was not unknown. He was unrecognized. There was a difference. He avoided conferences. Declined interviews. Let others take credit publicly while he moved quietly behind the scenes. He specialized in one thing. Finding organizations that confused arrogance with competence.
And correcting them.
Whitmore Holdings had appeared on his radar 6 months earlier. Not because of profits. Because of complaints. High turnover. Whistleblower settlements. Quiet lawsuits resolved with loud money. Patterns. Nathan didn't dismantle companies. He dismantled cultures. The purser returns. The purser approached again, posture firm. Ms. Whitmore, he said, I've spoken with the captain. Margaret straightened. Yes. He's aware of your concerns. And there is no basis for action against Mr. Cole. Margaret's breath caught. I'm being harassed. The purser met her gaze evenly. You are being observed. Silence stretched. What does that mean? Margaret demanded. It means, the purser said carefully, that further incidents will result in intervention upon landing. Margaret stared. Intervention. Nathan closed his laptop. Thank you, he said politely to the purser. The purser nodded and walked away. Margaret's world tilted. The shift from power to exposure. She leaned toward Nathan, voice trembling with restrained fury. You think this ends well for you? Nathan turned to her. It already has, he replied. Her laugh was hollow. You don't scare me. Nathan's eyes were steady. You keep saying that, he said. People who aren't scared don't repeat it. Margaret recoiled slightly. She looked away. For the first time since boarding, she did not have a response ready. Somewhere over the Atlantic, Nathan opened a secure messaging app. One name. Elena, Compliance Director. Nathan. Are we clear to proceed upon landing? Elena. Yes. Board notified. Legal standing confirmed. Nathan good. Quiet execution. He closed the app. Margaret watched him. What are you planning? She demanded. Nathan didn't answer immediately. Then, transparency, he said.
She scoffed.
People like you don't understand how the world works. Nathan met her gaze. No, he said softly. People like you forget. The first crack in public. Turbulence shook the plane lightly. A woman 2 rows back whispered to her partner. That woman has been awful. Her partner nodded. Margaret heard. She heard everything now. Eyes no longer slid away. They lingered, judging, measuring. The cabin wasn't on her side anymore. Margaret adjusted her coat, suddenly aware of how alone she was. Nathan's warning. As the cabin lights dimmed further, Nathan spoke again. Quietly, deliberately. "When we land," he said, "don't speak for a while." Margaret turned sharply. "Excuse me?" "Listen," Nathan continued. "Just for once." She laughed bitterly. "You think you're teaching me a lesson?" Nathan shook his head. "No," he said. "I'm giving you a chance to learn one." Margaret stared at him. Her heart pounded. For the first time, the thought crossed her mind. What if he isn't bluffing? The descent begins. The captain's voice echoed through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent shortly." Margaret's stomach tightened. Nathan looked out the window. Clouds parted. Land approached. So, did consequences. End of part 3. Margaret Whitmore had spent her life believing power protected her. At 30,000 feet, she had learned something else. Power only works until someone stops being afraid of it. The descent always changed people. At cruising altitude, arrogance floated. During landing, gravity returned. Margaret Whitmore felt it in her chest as the aircraft angled downward. The hum of the engines shifted pitch, deeper now, heavier. The cabin lights brightened slightly, as if the plane itself wanted passengers awake for what came next. She tightened her seatbelt. Her palms were damp. Across from her, Nathan Cole sat still, hands resting calmly on the armrests, gaze fixed on the clouds thinning beneath them. He looked less like a man bracing for impact, and more like someone waiting for confirmation. Margaret hated that. The announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice echoed, calm and measured. "We'll be landing shortly. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and your seats are in the upright position." Margaret swallowed. This was usually her favorite part of any flight. The anticipation of arrival, the reassurance that someone would be waiting, that doors would open into a world arranged for her convenience. Today, it felt like a verdict being read aloud. She glanced at Nathan. He hadn't looked at her once during descent. That silence felt louder than anything he could have said. Touchdown. The wheels hit the runway with a firm, unmistakable jolt. Reality arrived with them. A few passengers exhaled in relief. Others reached for phones that still showed no service. The cabin buzzed with the restless energy of arrival. Margaret stood up immediately. Too fast. She reached for her coat, nearly losing her balance. Nathan stood as well, but unhurried, giving her space, letting her rush ahead. "You don't need to hurry," he said calmly. She spun around. "Stay away from me," she snapped. "I know exactly what you're trying to do." Nathan met her eyes. "Do you?" Her mouth opened. No words came out. The jet bridge. As the door opened and the jet bridge connected, a subtle shift passed through the crew. The purser exchanged a look with Lisa. A quiet nod. Margaret noticed. "What's that?" she demanded. "What's going on?" Lisa smiled politely. "Please proceed, ma'am." Margaret marched forward, heels striking metal now instead of carpet. The jet bridge felt narrower, colder. Her breath echoed back at her. Halfway through, she stopped. Two airport officials stood near the terminal entrance. And beside them, a woman in a dark blazer, tablet in hand, waiting
For them.
Margaret's heart slammed against her ribs. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "I have meetings." Nathan stepped up beside her. "Yes," he said softly. "You do." The first name spoken aloud. "Ms. Whitmore," the woman in the blazer said, voice professional, controlled. "I'm from compliance." Margaret laughed sharply. "Compliance with what?" "With conduct," the woman replied. "And corporate governance." Margaret turned to Nathan, fury blazing. "You did this." Nathan didn't deny it. "I allowed it," he corrected. The woman continued. "Your company has been under internal review for several months. Today's incident provided additional documentation." Margaret's face flushed. "You can't investigate me because of a flight misunderstanding." The woman tapped her tablet. "We're not." She looked at Nathan. "Mr. Cole?" "Yes," he replied. "We're ready." Margaret's world tilted. Ready for what? Nathan turned to her fully for the first time since landing. For the truth to stop being optional. Terminal exposure. Passengers streamed past them, pretending not to listen. Some slowed anyway. Whispers followed. Margaret felt eyes on her. Not impressed, not deferential. Curious. Concerned. Judging. She folded her arms defensively. This is harassment, she insisted. I'll call my board. Nathan nodded. They already know. Her breath caught.
What?
An emergency session was convened during the flight, Nathan said evenly. Your behavior is consistent. The word sliced.
Consistent.
Whitmore Holdings, elsewhere. In a glass-walled boardroom thousands of miles away, 12 people stared at a screen. Video footage played silently. Audio transcript scrolled beside it. Not just from today. From years. Margaret's voice, over and over. Cutting. Dismissing. Belittling. Patterns. One board member finally spoke. We protected her because she delivered results. Another replied quietly. At what cost? Silence followed. Back at the terminal. Margaret shook her head. This isn't real. Nathan lowered his voice. It is. You just never imagined you'd be on this side of it.
She pointed at him.
You think you're better than me? Nathan considered the question. No, he said honestly. I think I'm more accountable. That hurt more than any insult. The meeting she couldn't avoid. They escorted Margaret, not roughly, but firmly, into a private room near the terminal offices. A chair. A table. Glass walls. Visibility. She hated that most of all. Nathan didn't sit. He stood near the wall, arms relaxed. This is a temporary review, the compliance officer explained. No arrest. No charges. But you are required to remain available. Margaret scoffed. You're grounding me? In a sense, the woman replied. Margaret laughed bitterly. I built a company. I don't answer to people like you. Nathan finally spoke again. You answer to systems you forgot existed. The call. Margaret's phone buzzed. Signal restored. She snatched it up. Board chair, calling. She answered instantly. Yes. The voice on the other end was calm. Too calm. Margaret, the chair said. We need you to listen. She opened her mouth. Please, he continued. Just listen. Her throat tightened. We've reviewed the documentation, he said. Effective immediately. You are being placed on administrative leave, pending full investigation. The room went silent. Administrative leave. Margaret laughed weakly. That's temporary. Perhaps, the chair replied. But your authority is suspended. The call ended. Margaret stared at the phone. Then at Nathan. Her voice cracked. You planned this. Nathan shook his head. No, he said. You demonstrated it. The first collapse. Margaret sank into the chair. Her posture, once rigid, commanding, crumbled. For the first time, she looked small. I didn't mean, she began. Nathan interrupted gently. Intent doesn't erase impact. Tears welled in her eyes. This isn't fair. Nathan nodded. It rarely feels that way to the person who's never faced consequences before. Outside the room, employees passed. Travelers laughed. Life continued. Inside, Margaret Whitmore sat alone with the weight of her own patterns. And for the first time in her life, no one rushed to save her. Nathan's last words in the room. Nathan stepped toward the door. He paused. Margaret, he said quietly. She looked up. This didn't happen because you sat next to the wrong man. She swallowed. It happened because you thought sitting next to anyone beneath you was a problem. Then he left. Silence feels different when it isn't chosen. Margaret Whitmore sat alone in the glass-walled room long after Nathan Cole had left. The compliance officer had stepped out quietly, closing the door with professional restraint, leaving Margaret exposed to the terminal's passing world.
People walked by.
Some glanced in. Some pretended not to. None stopped. This was new. For most of her life, rooms adjusted to her presence. Meetings paused. Voices softened. People waited. Now, The world moved forward without checking whether she was ready. Her phone lay face down on the table. She didn't touch it. She already knew what waited there. The first hour. Margaret replayed the flight in fragments. Nathan's calm voice. The purser's careful wording. The word documented repeating like a warning bell she had ignored. She had always believed authority meant control. But authority, she was learning, only worked when others agreed to recognize it. And recognition could be withdrawn. Quietly. Legally.
Completely.
Nathan Cole, elsewhere. Nathan didn't wait in the terminal. He never did. He stepped into a black car waiting near the private exit, nodding once to the driver. The door closed without drama, sealing him inside silence again. As the car pulled away, his phone buzzed. Elena, compliance director. Board response is escalating. Media inquiries expected within 24 hours. Legal exposure manageable. Culture review approved. Nathan typed back. Proceed as planned. No statements from me. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked out the window. He didn't feel victorious.
He felt resolved.
Margaret's phone wakes up. The vibration startled her. She flipped the phone over. Missed calls. Board members. Legal counsel. PR director. She ignored them all and scrolled further down. A message from someone she hadn't expected. Assistant private. They locked my access. I don't know what to do.
I'm sorry.
Margaret stared at the screen. For years, assistants had absorbed her stress, her impatience, her sharpness. She had never apologized. Now someone was apologizing to her. The irony burned. The call she took. When the phone rang again, she answered without looking. Yes, she said sharply. Margaret. The voice said gently. It's David. Her husband. She closed her eyes. What do you want? She asked. I saw the news alert starting to form, he said carefully. I thought you should know. Know what? She snapped. That my board betrayed me? There was a pause. Margaret, David said quietly. They didn't betray you. They protected themselves. Her grip tightened. This is temporary, she insisted. I'll explain. They'll understand. Another pause. Then, they already do, he said. That's why they acted. The words landed harder than any accusation. David continued, voice steady but tired. I've defended you for years, he said. But I can't do it this time. She swallowed. What are you saying? I'm saying I need space, he replied. And so do you. The call ended. Margaret stared at the blank screen.
Space.
That was what everyone was giving her now. Public becomes permanent. By evening, the story had leaked. Not the flight. Not the confrontation. Those details stayed buried behind NDAs and discretion. What surfaced instead was worse. Whitmore Holdings chair placed on administrative leave. Internal review citing cultural failures. Board signals leadership reset. No quotes. No interviews. No defenses. Just statements.
Clean.
Cold. Final sounding. Margaret watched the headlines refresh again and again, each update erasing a little more of the identity she had wrapped herself in for decades. The mirror moment. Later that night, alone in a hotel room, she didn't choose, Margaret stood in front of a mirror. No makeup. Hair pulled back loosely. No armor. She barely recognized herself. Not because she looked different, but because she couldn't tell who she was without people reacting to her. She whispered aloud, testing the sound of her own voice. What did I do wrong? The mirror offered no comfort. Only memory. Nathan's reflection. In a quiet apartment overlooking the city, Nathan poured a glass of water and sat by the window. The skyline glowed softly. Somewhere behind those lights, systems were shifting. Boards recalibrating. Managers watching their tone. Executives rereading policies they had once ignored. This was the real outcome. Not punishment. Adjustment. He thought of Margaret again, not with anger, not even with satisfaction. With clarity. People like her were never villains in their own stories. They were just unchallenged. A message she didn't expect. Margaret's phone buzzed one last time that night. An unknown number. She hesitated, then opened it. You asked earlier what I wanted from you. I want nothing. Accountability isn't a transaction.
She knew who it was.
Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then she typed. I don't know who I am without power. The response came after a long pause. That's where most people start. Margaret stared at the words until the screen dimmed. Power leaves quietly. It doesn't slam doors. It doesn't announce its departure. It simply stops answering when called. Margaret Whitmore learned that over the following weeks. Week 1. The aftermath. The first week after the flight passed in a blur of logistics. Lawyers spoke carefully. PR consultants spoke vaguely. Board members spoke only through intermediaries. Margaret was advised not to speak publicly. Not to post. Not to explain. Silence is strategic, they told her. She almost laughed. Silence had never been her strategy. It had always been her weapon. Now it was her cage. She watched Whitmore Holdings from the outside for the first time in her life. Press releases appeared without her approval. Decisions were announced without her signature. A temporary CEO was appointed. Temporary had never felt so permanent. Week 2. Resistance. By the second week, Margaret's instinct returned.
Fight.
She drafted emails, prepared talking points, outlined context and misunderstandings. She wanted to explain that she was demanding, not abusive, that she was firm, not cruel, that she expected excellence. Her legal team stopped her. Margaret, one attorney said gently, this isn't about what you meant. It's about what you normalized. That word again. Normalized. She deleted the draft. Then rewrote it. Then deleted it again. Nathan Cole, watching the ripples. Nathan followed the developments quietly. Not obsessively. Not emotionally. Professionally. He reviewed reports from Elena and her team. Internal surveys from Whitmore Holdings showed something unexpected. Employees were speaking. Not loudly. Not angrily. But honestly. Stories surfaced. Patterns aligned. The culture audit expanded beyond Margaret. This was always the point. Nathan never dismantled one person. He dismantled permission. Margaret's first real loss. The invitation never arrived. A charity gala she had chaired for 15 years went on without her. Her name was absent from the program. A former colleague sent a brief message.
Hope you're doing okay.
Things have changed here. No details. No warmth. Just distance. Margaret stared at the message longer than she should have. This wasn't punishment. This was exclusion. And exclusion cut deeper than confrontation ever had. The job interview. It happened on a Tuesday. Margaret hadn't planned it. She had simply grown tired of waiting. She put on a modest blazer, no insignia, no statement jewelry, and walked into a consulting firm that specialized in corporate governance. The receptionist smiled politely. Name, Margaret Whitmore. The smile faltered for half a second. Recovered. Please have a seat. Margaret sat. Waited.
Observed.
She noticed things she never had before. The receptionist's tense shoulders. The hushed voices. The careful glances. She was no longer the storm. She was the weather report. When the interview ended, the answer was courteous but firm. We'll be in touch. They never were. Nathan's private doubt. Late one evening, Nathan stood alone on his balcony. City lights below.
He thought of Margaret again.
Not as she was on the flight. Not as she had been in the boardroom.
But as she was now.
Stripped of context. Forced into stillness. He questioned himself, not his actions, but their aftermath. Was accountability enough? Or did it require something more? He had dismantled systems before. He had never watched someone live afterward this closely. Margaret confronts memory. One night, unable to sleep, Margaret opened an old storage box. Awards.
Plaques.
Photographs. Her younger self stared back at her, sharp-eyed, ambitious, hungry. She remembered being underestimated, ignored. She remembered promising herself she would never be powerless again. Somewhere along the way, she had mistaken fear for respect. She whispered into the empty room. When did I stop listening? The room didn't answer. But the question stayed. The unexpected call. It came from a number she didn't recognize. She almost ignored it. Almost. Margaret Whitmore? The voice asked. Yes, she replied cautiously. This is Lisa, the woman said. The flight attendant. From the flight. Margaret's breath caught. I wanted to check in, Lisa continued. I wasn't sure if this was appropriate. Margaret swallowed. It's fine, she said quietly. There was a pause. I just wanted you to know, Lisa said, that documentation matters. But so does change. Margaret closed her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. After the call ended, Margaret sat in silence for a long time. Not the empty kind. The reflective kind. The shift begins. Margaret started small. She listened more than she spoke. She read internal reports she had once ignored. She attended a mediation session not as an executive but as a participant. It was uncomfortable,
Humbling.
necessary. She didn't become likable overnight. She didn't become gentle. But she became aware. And awareness reshaped everything. Nathan makes a choice. Nathan received one final update from Elena. Culture reforms progressing. External oversight recommended for former chair if reintegration is considered. Nathan stared at the screen. Reintegration. The word carried weight. He typed slowly. Proceed with safeguards. Accountability is a process, not an event. He closed the laptop. For the first time since the flight, he felt the arc bend, not toward revenge but toward resolution. Public memory is selective. It forgets quickly when nothing changes. It remembers relentlessly when patterns repeat. Margaret Whitmore learned this when she tried to step back into the world she once commanded. The first attempt. 3 months after the flight, Margaret received an invitation. Not a headline. Not a reinstatement. An invitation. A closed-door panel on leadership accountability and corporate culture, hosted by a nonprofit that specialized in executive reform. No cameras. No press. Just conversation. Her advisors were split. Too soon, one warned. Necessary, another countered. Margaret decided to go. Not because she felt ready. Because avoiding it felt like hiding. The room. The conference room was smaller than she expected. Round table. Neutral lighting. No elevated seats. That unsettled her. She arrived early and sat quietly, hands folded, posture careful. Other participants filtered in: former executives, HR specialists, compliance officers. Some recognized her. Some pretended not to. When the moderator began, Margaret listened. Really listened. Stories emerged. A former COO who had driven talent away without realizing it. A manager who had mistaken fear for efficiency. A whistleblower who had nearly lost everything by speaking up. Margaret felt exposed without being accused. That was worse. When she spoke, the moderator turned to her gently. Margaret, she said, what changed for you? Margaret hesitated. Old instincts urged her to control the narrative. She resisted. I lost the ability to dismiss feedback, Margaret said slowly. Not because I became wiser, but because people stopped protecting me from it. The room stayed silent. No applause. No judgment. Just attention. I didn't think I was abusive, she continued. I thought I was effective.
She paused.
I was wrong. The words felt heavy, but true. Outside the room, not everyone was willing to listen. A former Whitmore Holdings employee watched the live stream replay later that evening. She recognized the calm tone, the careful language.
She scoffed.
Too little, she muttered. Too late. She wasn't alone. Online commentary was restrained, but skeptical. No outrage. No forgiveness. Just distance. Margaret read it all. She didn't respond. Nathan Cole observes. Nathan watched the panel from a distance. Not live. Not obsessively. He reviewed transcripts afterward, scanning for deflection. He found none. That surprised him. Margaret wasn't asking for sympathy. She wasn't rewriting history. She was standing still. That mattered. But it didn't erase impact. And Nathan knew that redemption wasn't something one person could grant. The resistance. When word spread that Whitmore Holdings was considering Margaret's limited advisory return, non-executive, heavily supervised, resistance surfaced immediately. Internal memos leaked. Anonymous letters circulated. Employees demanded clarity. What safeguards are in place? Who protects us if patterns return? Why her? The interim CEO paused the discussion. This wasn't a legal problem.
It was a trust problem.
And trust moved slower than policy. Margaret confronts the wall. The board chair called her privately. "We need to slow this down," he said. "There's pushback." Margaret nodded. "I understand." There was a pause. "You didn't interrupt," he observed. She almost smiled. "I'm practicing." After the call, Margaret sat alone in her apartment, smaller now, quieter. She realized something uncomfortable. This wasn't punishment. This was the world deciding whether it could risk her again. And the answer wasn't hers to give. A letter she didn't expect. An envelope arrived by mail. Handwritten address. No return name. Inside was a single page. "I worked under you for 6 years. You never yelled at me. You never insulted me. But you made it very clear that I was replaceable. I left because I couldn't breathe. I'm glad you're listening now. I just wish it hadn't cost so much to get there." Margaret folded the letter carefully. She didn't cry. She didn't defend herself. She placed it in a drawer she now kept for things she needed to remember. Nathan's moral question. Nathan met with Elena late one evening. "Do you think people can change?" she asked. Nathan didn't answer immediately. "Yes," he said finally. "But change doesn't entitle them to restoration." Elena nodded. "Then what does?" "Consistency," Nathan replied. Without applause. Margaret's quiet choice. Margaret withdrew her name from consideration. No announcement. No explanation. Just a brief message to the board. "I'm not ready to be trusted again. I'll keep doing the work." Some praised the decision. Others doubted the motive. Margaret didn't comment. She returned to mediation. Mentorship from the other side of the table. Listening roles. Unseen work. The world moves carefully. Whitmore Holdings continued reform without her.
Slowly.
Deliberately. Employees noticed. Not because everything improved overnight, but because leadership stopped pretending it already had. That mattered. Real change is rarely tested when everything is calm. It's tested when old instincts are triggered, when pressure returns, when power is offered again, when nobody is watching closely. Margaret Whitmore was about to face that test.
She didn't know it yet.
6 months later, Time had softened the headlines. Not erased them, just pushed them lower in the search results. Margaret's life had settled into something unfamiliar but stable. No executive schedule. No assistants. No constant validation. Her days were quieter, structured around mediation sessions, reading, and occasional advisory conversations where she spoke last, if at all. She had learned to pause. That alone had changed everything. Then the call came. The offer. It was from the nonprofit that hosted the panel. "We've been asked to consult," the director explained carefully. "A mid-sized firm. Cultural overhaul. Board divided. Employees afraid." Margaret listened without interrupting. "They requested you specifically," the director added. Margaret closed her eyes. "Why?" "Because you're visible," the director said. "And because you failed publicly." The word landed cleanly. No euphemism. No cushioning. Margaret nodded. "And the conditions? You would have no authority," the director continued. "No executive power. No veto. You advise only. If at any point the staff feels unsafe, you're out." Margaret thought of the plane. The seat. The certainty she once carried. "I'll do it," she said. "On one condition." "Yes. That the employees choose whether I stay." There was a pause. "That's unusual." "So am I now," Margaret replied. Nathan Cole, here's the echo. Nathan received a briefing on the same company from a different angle. The firm had appeared on Horizon's internal watch list months earlier. Rapid growth. Impressive margins. Troubling attrition. Same patterns. Different names. He read the summary. Then froze on a familiar detail. External cultural advisor, Margaret Whitmore, proposed. Nathan leaned back. Interesting. The first meeting. Margaret entered the building without announcement. No entourage. No reserved parking. No expectations. She sat in a circle of employees, some senior, some junior. HR present. Board observers silent. The facilitator spoke first. Margaret is here at our request, she said. She will answer questions. You decide if she continues. Margaret nodded once. An employee raised her hand immediately. Why should we trust you? Margaret didn't rush. You shouldn't, she said. Not yet. Murmurs spread. Another voice followed. What makes you different now? Margaret met their eyes. Nothing permanent, she said. Only behavior over time. The room stayed quiet. Not hostile. Not welcoming. Assessing. Nathan's dilemma. Nathan watched reports filter in over the following weeks. Margaret didn't dominate meetings. Didn't interrupt. Didn't override discomfort. When challenged, she listened. When confronted, she acknowledged. Employees noticed. So did skeptics. Some called it strategy. Others called it growth. Nathan called it incomplete. Not because she was failing, but because the real test hadn't arrived yet. The confrontation. It came without warning. A senior executive at the firm, defensive, threatened, pushed back publicly during a session. This is overcorrection, he snapped. We're coddling people. Margaret felt the room tighten. Old instincts surged. Correct him. Reassert authority. Control the narrative. She paused. The silence stretched. Everyone watched. Margaret inhaled slowly. You may be right, she said calmly. Or you may be afraid of losing control. Either way, this conversation isn't about winning. The executive scoffed. Easy for you to say. Margaret nodded. It wasn't always. She turned to the room. If you feel unsafe because of how this conversation is going, she said, we stop. Right now. The room breathed. No one stopped it. That mattered. The vote. At the end of the trial period, the facilitator called for a vote. Anonymous. Simple. Continue. Or end. Margaret waited outside the room. She didn't pace. She didn't rehearse. She had learned what waiting really meant. The door opened. The facilitator smiled slightly.
They want you to stay, she said.
Margaret exhaled. Not relief. Resolution. Nathan makes contact. Nathan requested a private meeting. Neutral location. No lawyers. No boards. Just conversation. Margaret arrived early. So did he. They sat across from each other. Silence passed comfortably. You didn't have to do this, Nathan said finally. Margaret nodded. I know. Why did you? She didn't answer immediately. Because losing power taught me something, she said. But earning trust is teaching me more. Nathan studied her. Do you believe you deserve redemption? Margaret shook her head. No, she said. I believe redemption isn't mine to claim. Nathan leaned back. That was the right answer. There comes a point in every reckoning where neutrality disappears. Where watching quietly becomes choosing a side. Where silence becomes permission. Margaret Whitmore reached that point on a day that looked, on the surface, completely ordinary.
The warning signs.
The firm Margaret was advising, Greyfield Solutions, had stabilized faster than anyone expected. Exit interviews slowed. Complaints shifted from fear to frustration, a subtle but important change. Meetings grew quieter, then more honest. Too honest for some. Margaret noticed it first in the body language. Executives who once dominated rooms now sat with crossed arms. Jaws clenched. Smiles fixed too tightly. The old hierarchy wasn't gone, it was waiting. She recognized that posture. She had worn it herself. Nathan Cole's parallel path. Nathan had not disengaged. He rarely did. Horizon Strategic's internal models flagged Greyfield again, not as a crisis, but as a fork. The company would either complete its cultural shift or snap back violently. There was always backlash before collapse. Nathan had seen it before. He scheduled a review call. The email that changed everything. It arrived late at night. Anonymous.
Short.
They're planning to push her out. They say she's temporary. They're waiting until the next earnings call. Margaret stared at the message for a long time. She didn't forward it.
Didn't reply.
She knew the playbook. Let the reformer do the dirty work. Absorb the tension. Then remove them quietly and restore order. She had done the same thing once. The board meeting was scheduled for Friday morning. Margaret was not invited. That was deliberate. She asked to attend anyway. The request was denied. We'll update you afterward, the chair said politely. Margaret closed her laptop. She felt something unfamiliar rise in her chest. Not anger. Resolve. Nathan's call.
Her phone rang.
Nathan. I assume you've seen the signs, he said. Yes, Margaret replied. What will you do? She looked out the window. 6 months ago, she would have maneuvered, negotiated, protected her relevance.
Now?
I'll speak, she said. Nathan paused. That will cost you, he warned. I know. The uninvited entrance. Margaret walked into the boardroom unannounced. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The chair stiffened. This is a closed session, he said. I know, Margaret replied calmly. I won't take long. Security shifted. Margaret didn't look at them. She addressed the room. You're planning to remove me, she said plainly. Not because the work failed, but because it worked. Murmurs rippled. You've stabilized the company enough to feel safe again, she continued. And now you want your old comfort back. The CFO scoffed. You're overstepping. Margaret nodded. I used to do that too. She took a breath. This isn't about me, she said. It's about whether you mean what you said to your employees. Silence. You don't have to keep me, Margaret finished. But if you undo the safeguards, the same patterns will return. And you'll own them. She turned toward the door, then stopped.
One more thing, she said.
If you remove me quietly, I won't fight it. If you remove the protections, I will speak publicly.
Gasps.
The chair stood. That's a threat. Margaret shook her head. No, she said. That's accountability. She left. The fallout. Within hours, rumors spread. Within a day, the board delayed the vote. Within a week, safeguards remained intact. Margaret was dismissed anyway.
Publicly. Politely.
With gratitude language. She read the announcement without flinching. This time, she had expected it. Nathan's choice. Nathan reviewed the sequence carefully. Margaret had crossed the final line. Not for herself. For others. He picked up the phone. Elena, he said, green-light the acquisition.
Pause.
Include cultural covenants, he added. Permanent ones. Margaret's quiet evening. Margaret packed her notes into a single folder. No desk to clear. No office to vacate. She walked out without ceremony. Outside, evening settled. Her phone buzzed. A message from Nathan. You did the one thing you couldn't undo. She typed back. I know. Another message followed. That's why it mattered. The world reacts. Industry blogs picked up whispers. Advisor removed after confronting board. Culture clash resurfaces. Leadership reform under scrutiny. Employees noticed what didn't change. Safeguards stayed. Processes remained. Language softened. Margaret wasn't there. But the work was. The truth of the line. Margaret sat alone that night, exhaustion heavy but clean. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. And for the first time, she didn't regret it. Because some lines, once crossed for the right reason, change you permanently. The world didn't end with a headline. It rarely does. There was no dramatic press conference. No viral clip. No apology tour. What followed was quieter and far more permanent. 1 year later, the building no longer bore Margaret Whitmore's name. Whitmore Holdings had rebranded quietly, carefully, as companies do when they want distance, without confession. New leadership spoke a different language now about process, culture, guardrails. It wasn't perfect, but it was different. Employees still argued. Deadlines still hurt. Profits still mattered. What didn't return was fear disguised as efficiency. That absence was Margaret's unseen fingerprint. Margaret Whitmore, unnamed. Margaret lived in a smaller city now. No skyline views. No private drivers. No invitations that arrived without asking. Her days were structured but simple. Morning walks. Reading. Occasional facilitation work for organizations that knew exactly who she was and invited her anyway. She never led. She advised, listened, and left. Some rooms welcomed her cautiously. Others didn't. She accepted both. Because acceptance, she had learned, was not something to demand. The letter she finally sent. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Margaret sat at a wooden desk and wrote a letter she had rewritten dozens of times. Not to the board. Not to the public. To herself. I thought power meant never being questioned. I was wrong. Power was being trusted, and I broke that. I cannot undo the harm. I can only refuse to repeat it. This is not redemption. It is responsibility. She folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer as the others. Not as a reminder of shame. As a boundary. Nathan Cole's quiet legacy. Nathan never spoke publicly about the flight. Not once. No interviews. No podcasts. No essays. But his influence spread anyway. Cultural covenants became standard in Horizon's acquisitions. Executive contracts changed. Language shifted. Zero tolerance disappeared, replaced by something stricter. Documented accountability. Executives adjusted. Some left. Others learned. Nathan watched from a distance. This was never about punishment. It was about recalibration. Their final conversation. It happened by accident. A conference in a city neither of them lived in anymore. Margaret recognized Nathan first. He hadn't changed much. Still quiet. Still observant. She hesitated. Then approached. "Nathan," she said. He turned. "Margaret." They stood there, unremarkable among the crowd. No tension. No performance. "I wanted to thank you," she said finally. Nathan studied her face. "For what?" "For not destroying me," she replied. "When you could have." Nathan shook his head. "I didn't save you," he said. "You chose what to do after." She nodded. That was the hardest part. They shared a small, respectful silence. Then Nathan said, "Take care," and walked away. No closure speech. No symbolism. Just truth. The young analyst. Months later, a junior analyst at a firm Nathan had recently acquired raised a concern during a meeting. Her voice shook. The room went quiet. Old instincts stirred. But the senior executive paused. "Let's hear her out," he said. The analyst spoke. She was right. The room adjusted. Nathan noticed. He didn't smile. He simply noted the absence of fear. That was enough. Margaret's last test. An executive once asked her quietly after a long workshop, "Do you miss it? The power?" Margaret considered the question. "Yes," she said honestly. "Sometimes." Then she added, "But I don't miss who I was when I had it." The executive nodded. That answer stayed with him longer than any framework ever had. The final image. On a late evening flight, Nathan Cole sat in a window seat. Not first class. Not economy. Just a seat. The cabin lights dimmed. The engines hummed steadily. A flight attendant passed and smiled. "Welcome aboard," she said. Nathan nodded politely. As the plane lifted into the dark, he looked out at the scattered lights below. Thousands of lives. Thousands of decisions. Thousands of small moments where power could be used or restrained. The world didn't need louder corrections. It needed quieter ones. Final words. Some people think consequences are loud. They aren't. They're patient. They wait. They arrive when patterns refuse to change. And when they do, they don't ask who you were. They ask who you choose to be next.